is Jacqueline Encolada, and today I will be presenting A Rose for Emily, specifically the tradition, gender, and decay from back in the South. Southern Gothic literature often explores cultural decay, moral tension, and the weight of tradition. In the story A Rose for Emily, Emily becomes more than a character from what I've read. She becomes a symbol of a culture trapped between its past and the modern world. Scholars note that Southern Gothic fiction frequently uses themes of isolation, decay, and gendered oppression to reveal deeper anxieties within the early South. Understanding this genre's context helps us see Emily not only as an isolated woman, but as a representation of the region's psychological struggles. The purpose of this project to me is to analyze how the author uses Emily's life, her father's strict control, and the decaying state of their home to criticize the restrictive nature of Southern tradition. Scholars argue that Emily represents both the Old South's nostalgia and its resistance to progress. At the same time, feminist critics highlight how Emily's story reflects the limited agency women were given under patriarchal expectations. When taking all of that together, these viewpoints support the thesis that the author uses Emily to expose the damaging effects of tradition and gender constraint. One of the most influential forces shaping Emily's identity in the story is her father. His control severely limits her emotional development and personal freedom. Feminist scholars argue that Emily's lack of autonomy reflects the broader reality of Southern women who were pressured into dependence and obedience by the men in their lives. Even after her father's death, his presence continues to shape her behavior and symbolizes how patriarchal influence often extends beyond the lifespan of the man who was enforced in it. Roberts also comments that Emily is shaped not by her own choices, but by the narratives of men imposed on her, even throughout her childhood until her adulthood. When it comes to tradition versus change, Emily represents the Old South, a world determined to resist modernization. Her refusal to pay taxes and her avoidance of new community expectations reveals her desire to preserve a social order that no longer exists. It is noted that Emily embodies a culture defined by memory resistance and the inability to accept change. Similarly, scholars from Atlantis Press argue that Emily's clinging to outdated traditions reflects the South's larger struggle to move forward. Her character becomes a symbol of a region frozen in time, yet to face reality. Roles and female agency. Emily's limited choices reflect the passive role women were expected to play in the early 20th century Southern society. The community reinforces these expectations by pitying her, judging her, and defining her life for her. Feminist analysis shows that Emily's lack of agency is not a personal failing, but in fact is the product of a culture designed to restrict women. Social isolation. Emily's isolation is both physical and social once you read about it. She withdraws from the community, but the town also contributes to her isolation through constant gossip and judgment. Roberts explains that the townspeople help shape the narrative of Emily's life, often replacing empathy with speculation and control. This environment intensifies her emotional instability rather than supporting her. Symbolism of the house. Specifically, we're talking about Emily's house, which is decaying, and it mirrors basically how her own psychological, physically, and mentally is deteriorating. It's described that the Garrison home, as a powerful symbol of the Old South's collapse, is marked by dull darkness and neglect. Just as Emily refuses to adapt to societal change in the story, the house stands as a decaying monument to outdated values that have no longer served a place in nowadays society. Grotesque imagery is also used in the storyline, such as Southern Gothic literature often uses grotesque elements to symbolize cultural decay. In A Rose for Emily, the corpse, the odor, and the layers of dust serve as reminders of the South's inability to release its past. It also is argued that these grotesque images reveal psychological and cultural anxieties buried beneath the surface of everyday life, especially for Emily. Emily is known as a cultural symbol throughout the book. Emily becomes more than an individual. She becomes a symbol specifically for the South and the memory of her trauma undergoing in that time zone. Roberts argues that Emily functions as a cultural object, carrying the emotional burden of an entire community's past. The town treats her as a myth instead of a person, which then reinforces her symbolic role throughout the story. Speaking of the community's role in Emily's downfall, it plays a major one in it. Specifically, their gossip shapes the public's narrative about her, and their judgments replace their empathy. Their satisfaction, or specifically their fascination with her life and death, reveals how society contributes to her isolation and ultimately shares responsibility for her tragic fate, as they were her undoing as well. Now on to death and preservation. Emily's attempt to preserve her father and her home shows her refusal to accept loss or change. Scholars note that these acts symbolize the South's desperate attempts to hold on to its past, even when the past becomes harmful or grotesque for their own well-being, specifically Emily's. And then her actions reflect also a world unwilling to let go, even when letting go is necessary for healing and adapting to the new environment that she is in now. Now for the modernization pressures. As the town modernizes in the story, new leaders and changing values change the old traditions Emily represents. Scholars argue that Emily becomes a symbol of generational conflict, resisting all attempts at modernization. Her refusal to adapt shows the painful tension between the Old South and the emerging New Order, which are clashing. A feminist reading of the story highlights how Emily loses autonomy due to the expectations imposed on her by men and by society, especially with the modernization in play. For her father's control to the town's obsession with her personal life, Emily becomes an object rather than a fully recognized individual. Her tragedy reveals the consequences of denying women's agency and male-controlled dominating lives. The Southern Gothic genre uses decay, grotesque imagery, and oppressive traditions to explore the darker side of the Southern culture, as we see throughout this short story. The Oxford Research Encyclopedia explains that these elements reveal hidden anxieties about identity, class, and gender, and Emily fits right into this perfectly, becoming a central figure in uncovering the South's unresolved tensions with the modernization. When we bring all these themes together, patriarchy, tradition, decay, isolation, etc., we see how deeply Emily's life is shaped by cultural forces beyond her control. The author uses Emily to critique a society trapped in the past, unwilling to adapt, and determined to restrict the woman within it. In conclusion, we can see Emily as a trapped figure, both as a symbol of their consequences from the South and a victim of tradition. Her tragic life and death reveal how rigid expectations, especially for women, can lead to emotional and cultural decay. The author ultimately critiques the dangers of clinging to oppressive traditions instead of embracing change. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and for your time, and have a great day.